Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the regency, or, the crown and or the reign of James the First and the Sixth, right? So we left off in class talking about James the First and the Sixth, the first, Stuart king from Scotland that is going to unify the crowns together. We talked a little bit about its personality in class today, but this flip will actually mainly be talking about his entire reign and then leading into the reign of his son, Charles the First, right? And we'll be discussing him very, very heavily and his involvement in this thing that's going to be coming up called the English Civil War, okay? So what you're going to notice is that James is going to set the trend for him trying to become an absolutist, right? He's going to attempt to become an absolutist, and then his son is going to come in and do the exact same thing, and y'all, it's going to lead to an all-out civil war in England that's going to lead to a massive shift in politics and a lot of really crazy stuff going down. So go ahead and make sure you watch this flip. It's very, very solid from last year. It's not too long either, but enjoy it. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Y'all have a good one. Religious divide, okay? Because you've got how many religions running around in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Great Britain? Several of them, right? You've got the Presbyterians in Scotland, which actually James was raised as a Presbyterian, right? He was raised as a Presbyterian, which is inherently slightly different from Anglican. It has much more Calvinist elements than Anglicanism does, right? Anglican, on the other hand, is basically just like Diet Catholic. You know what I'm talking about? But what James is going to do when he's about to become king, he's going to convert to Anglicanism when he's a young man, and he's going to take that route. And he's going to be like, I'm going to become the head of the church. I'm the supreme head of the church. Ever since the Act of Supremacy came out under Henry VIII, the king is supposed to be the head of the Church of England. So he actually converts over to Anglicanism. But look at that. There's two religions that we just already brought up. We got Anglicans down in England, in London proper, and stuff like that. And we got the Presbyterians in Scotland. Now, some people are always going to ask, wait, why did the Presbyterians in Scotland, why did that take hold and stuff like that? A lot of that has to do with the religious movements that were going on during the Reformation itself. Mainly due to the fact that, you've got people that were coming back from Calvin's Geneva, taking different elements of Calvinism with them everywhere, right? And John Knox was a famous figure that went up into Scotland and started the Presbyterian movement, okay? Then you've also got Ireland, who is very, very big into Catholicism still, but it's illegal for them to practice, right? And you also have people like other parts of Scotland, wealthy Scottish people, are also slightly Catholic as well. Because Mary Queen of Scots was a Catholic too, right? The other one that you got running around is the Puritan movement, right? The Puritans are in England as well. So in England, we got Anglicans and Puritans, and then also in Scotland, we got our Presbyterians, and in Ireland, we got our Catholics, right? So this is a huge problem for James, right? Because he hates the Puritans more than anybody else. He's surprisingly tolerant of Catholics, and he also really understands the Presbyterians because he used to be one. Now, the biggest thing about it, though, is why does he dislike the Puritans more than anybody else, right? He dislikes the Puritans more than anybody else because of the reason why they have their name, the reason why they're called this, and what they want to do to the Anglican Church, right? Why are Puritans called Puritans? Where did they come from? Okay, if you remember back when we talked about the Reformation, when Mary, Bloody Mary, came to power, a lot of people ran away from England trying to seek exile somewhere safe. Several of them, several thousand of them, went to Switzerland and learned Calvinism from John Calvin's Geneva themselves. They then come back to England after Mary dies, and they think that the Anglican Church is too Catholic, right? They want to get rid of a lot of these different elements of the Catholic Church that are in the Anglican Church, right? That's why they're called Puritans, because they wanted to purify the Catholic Church, right? So in that essence, they wanted to get rid of the social hierarchy of the church, right? They didn't want all this different priests and bishops and all these other big hierarchical values that are very much there in the Catholic Church as well. They wanted to get rid of a lot of the big ceremony and the grandioseness. They wanted to get rid of a lot of the art that adorned the walls and stuff like that in Anglican churches because they thought it was too gaudy and stuff like that. Puritans are Calvinists. They want social revolution as well. Puritans want to make it so people are only wearing limited color clothing. They don't want people drinking in the streets. They don't want singing in public. They want focus on God, right? How do you know the Puritans already? Well, because there are actually two types of Puritans. There are Puritans who want to fix the church and stay in England, and then there are Puritan separatists who believe that there is no fixing the church, that they need to go off somewhere else and start their own separatist movement, right? So you got the Puritans in England who want to fix the church and change England completely. The separatists, on the other hand, hate everything that England's doing, hate James and his policies, and also, remember when you were younger, you learned about these people. They're called the Pilgrims, right? You know who the Pilgrims are. The Pilgrims then eventually got land in 1620. They got land from 1620 from James, or in 1620 from James, to go and start the Plymouth colony and the Massachusetts Bay colony, right? They go over there, they start that whole thing, and now, of course, when you were little, you colored pictures of pilgrims and you were like, religious freedom. But in reality, it wasn't really much about religious freedom. They were actually really kind of like very restrictive people. They made women wear cages on their face. They accused people of being witches and stuff like that. But that's neither here nor there, okay? So the separatists, he's got to deal with them as well. And also, the numbers of Puritans in Parliament are growing. Some of these different areas of England are electing representatives from their counties to the House of Commons in Parliament, right? Now, something you need to understand about Parliament real quick. It is the true powerhouse of the English government. It's their legislative branch, and it is garnered by two different houses. It's got the House of Lords and the House of Commons, but the power truly resides with the House of Commons. The House of Lords kind of eventually during this time period, and as it began to grow, kind of became a formality thing where they would take laws that came out of the House of Commons and kind of like the Parlement in France, they would just write them into like eloquent language. You know what I'm talking about? But the House of Commons is seeing numbers of Puritans being elected into their ranks. So their voice is getting louder, right? And at one point, several of the Puritans said one of the biggest reforms that needs to come to the church is they need to get rid of the bishop. They didn't like the idea of the bishop or the Archbishop of Canterbury because they thought it will kind of stank a lot of Catholicism and a lot of popes as well. And what James responded to that with is like, well, the bishop is like the ruler of the church, like I am the ruler of your country. So that if you want no bishop, you got no king, right? In the sense of he refused to ever give up that power, and he refused to ever give up the power of a bishop, right? So he's feuding with these people. One of the only things he does to try and placate the Puritans a little bit and to get them to basically shut up, because actually in the long run, James is a little bit of a pacifist. He doesn't like going to war because he thinks it's pointless, right? He also doesn't like feuding with people because he thinks it's dumb, because he just wants to focus on parties at his house and wants to get more money and stuff like that, right? Well, that's one of the biggest things he does to try and placate the Puritans is he actually has translated the Bible into English, right? They actually found a different version of the Bible that they leaned on a little bit, and they actually used it and translated it into the King's seal of approval, King James version of the Bible, right? To try and keep the Puritans happy and to move away from any kind of Latin text and stuff like that, right? So interesting little thing is he's constantly dealing with these Puritans, right? Very, very big thing. These religious divides are a very large pain in the rear end for him, right? Speaking of, that arse that he wants to show to Parliament so badly. Now, looking at it as well, he also begins a very large campaign of taking land away from Catholics in Ireland and stuff like that, which seems kind of weird, right? Because he's the son of a Catholic. And the land that he's taking from Irish Catholics, he's turning into plantations and stuff like that out in Ireland. Now, the weird thing about it, though, he's not very tolerant of Irish Catholics, but he was surprisingly tolerant of English Catholics in a sense that he doesn't want to hunt them down. He doesn't want to hunt them down. He has no desire to do that. Why does he have no desire to do that? Because he doesn't want to enrage the Catholic countries that are on the continent, like Spain, France, those other guys, right? Because like I said, he's a pacifist. He doesn't want to go to war, right? Now, with that, though, he is tolerant of them, yes. He doesn't care if they exist, but he banned public worship, right? He said, if you want to be a Catholic, you need to be an at-home Catholic strictly, right? He carried further that entire idea of Elizabethan idea and that Elizabethan argument of like, look, if you're going to be Catholic, you're going to do it in secret and we're not going to talk about it here. But then he takes it a little bit of a step further and he says that all people are expected to go to Anglican Mass, which is this idea called rescendency, right? So it's this idea that like you could basically get in trouble if you didn't go to Anglican Mass and people would start wondering, are you one of those at-home Catholics and stuff like that? So with that though, James is dealing with a lot of these issues. Now this rescendency model of, hey, if you're an at-home Catholic, you still have to go to Anglican Mass, is going to anger a lot of the Catholics in England. Now, a few of them, about 7 of them, get together and they decide that they want to kill James and they want to blow him up in Parliament, right? And this is where we left off in class talking about the 5th of November, the gunpowder plot that was actually held by Guy Fawkes, right? Guy Fawkes tried, with a handful of 6 other people, tried to blow him up by putting barrels of gunpowder underneath Parliament when James was supposed to come and open it, right? So the thing about it is, though, is they caught him, they interrogated him, they tortured him, he gave up his conspirators, they were all publicly executed, and the 5th of November literally turned into a gunpowder plot, or Gunpowder Day, right? The 5th of November literally became a day celebrated as an anti-Catholic holiday, right? Where they would burn effigies of Guy Fawkes and stuff like that because of the plot that they tried to use to kill the king, right? And there's a famous poem that goes along with it. It goes, remember, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I should think of no reason why the gunpowder treason shall ever be forgot, right? So that gunpowder day became a really big event that kind of even further showed James to not be tolerant of these Catholics and that they can't be trusted, right? Now, going forward as well, though, a lot of this hinges on as well the fact that James hates Parliament, right? So James doesn't like Puritans, and a lot of them are being elected into the Parliament, and James especially just doesn't like Parliament, right? Really quickly, what is the Parliament? The Parliament is the legislative body that exists inside of England, and he believes that he has the divine right of kings. Why would a legislative branch and a divine right ruler not get along? Well, they wouldn't get along due to the fact that a legislative branch is there to do one key simple thing: limit the power of kings. They are a constitutional setup, right? The thing about it is, remember, no real leader in Great Britain, ironically enough, that is a king is ever going to get close to absolutism due to the fact that they can't, because their parliament will prevent that, right? The parliament is an elected body of officials from different counties and districts throughout England, right? They elect these people to the members of the House of Commons. The House of Commons is then there to do a lot of key different things. They hold the power of the purse, which means they regulate tax money, right? If you don't know what parliament is, you might want to jot these things down, right? They regulate tax money, known as the power of the purse. They also are the ones that are in charge of enacting and passing laws, right? The king can start one, but they are the ones that are in charge of enacting and passing them, right? Also, they're the ones in charge of declaring war, right? So these three things are going to be big in limiting the power of kings. Now, really quickly, some of you might be asking, House of Lords, House of Commons, they make the parliament and stuff like that. But really quickly, how long have they been there? Where is parliament coming from? Is parliament something that all kings in England had to deal with? Well, something that you need to understand right now is that they have been around for a long time. The parliament is a medieval construct. They showed up in the Middle Ages following a massively important event. So massively important to the fact that for the rest of your existence in my class, if I ever say the document that serves as the earliest version of a constitution in any European country ever, period, that was signed in 1215 by King John, who was an English monarch at the time, you better say the word yay. All right, so now, I'm not kidding about this. This is one of those things that will help you write things on the AP test. It will help you remember it forever. It'll help you understand it. You're being inducted into a club, basically, right? In my class, every student that ever learns about this document, when I say the name of the document, you will respond with an excited yay, right? So not a yaw, not a woo, not a yay, right? An excited one, a cherished one, a hyper-pitched one at that, right? And I expect it to be loud in class, and I expect it to be intense in class, okay? So with that, though, the name of this document that set the parliament up, that limited the power of kings forever, was signed 400 years before James ever came to power, is known as the Magna Carta. Exactly. Thank you, Kermit the Frog. Now, so the big thing about the Magna Carta is that the Magna Carta is very important. It's going to set that parliament up, and it's going to permanently limit the power of kings since 1215. 1215, and James comes to power in 1603, right? So this whole thing, this idea of a parliamentary body limiting the power of kings in England had been around for hundreds of years, if not centuries, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is James is going to try to get around it, right? He's going to attempt to get around it because he believes he's a divine right ruler, right? He's like, oh, I'm going to try and get around this thing. I'm going to try and raise some money for myself because he wants to try and pull a Louis before Louis even exists, right? So you have to understand, Louis hasn't even been born yet. Louis the 14th, not even alive. Not currently what's going on in France is Louis the 13th is currently trying to have children, right? And trying to conceive Louis the 14th and stuff like that. Well, the thing about it is, though, is he wants to Louis before he even Louis, and he wants to make mad money and spend it on himself, right? So the thing about it is he's going to make the parliament mad when he does this, right? Whenever James tries to make this money for himself, he tries to do this one thing where he wants to increase this old customs duty that kings have actually collected for a really long time in England. So there was this old thing in the books that actually was on the books in the parliament for over 100 years. It's this thing called tonnage and poundage, right? Tonnage and poundage actually relates to a customs duty on foreign wine that's imported into England. Hence tons or tons of casks, right? And so poundage is referring, of course, to the money and the weight, right? So with that, though, tonnage and poundage is a tax that the king got to collect. He wanted to raise it so he could increase his personal money in his personal wallet and personal accounts, right? Well, the parliament's going to tell him, no. So they're going to be like, no, you cannot do that, right? You cannot just elect like new customs duties whenever you feel like, and this is going to make James very, very angry, right? And so with that, though, as well, he's going to make parliament even angrier when he decides to arrange the marriage of his son not to a Protestant woman, but to a Catholic woman. And this is the second Catholic woman that he tried to actually have him married off to. He wanted to try and create a marriage of convenience to get some like kind of like treaties going with other people that were going like down in like the continent itself. He actually tried to arrange a marriage between Charles, his son, and his least favorite son, by the way. His favorite son was this kid named Henry, okay? But Henry actually died from a mystery fever. So now the frail Charles is going to have to take over. So he tried to actually get him married off to one of the like royals of Spain, but that didn't pan out very well. And so he ends up having his son married off to a French noble, Henrietta Maria, Louis XIII's sister, aka Henry XIV's aunt, right? And so like literally, as you can tell, the English, like Stuarts, are going to be integrated into this monarchical stuff that's going on in the continent a little bit later on, because now the Stuarts are later going to be cousins with Louis XIV, right? Now, also another big thing he angered the Parliament with was when he executed Sir Walter Raleigh, one of their biggest members and biggest fans, right? Sir Walter Raleigh gets executed for some military movements that he does that actually, like, James thought was going to lead to further war, so he has him killed, right? This is going to anger the Parliament exponentially because they see that James is beginning to act like a tyrant. He wants money for himself. He wants to spend money on himself. He wants to have parties with the Duke of Buckingham back in the palace and stuff like that. He doesn't necessarily want to actually rule the people in an effective manner because he believes he's a divine right ruler. So he's going to have several feuds with Parliament. When he tries to raise taxes, Parliament would deliberately stall and like choke out monetary resources. They would be like, oh, well, we'll vote on that like on Tuesday. This is kind of like the parlements in France, right? So now, as you can see, Richelieu was probably seeing what was going on in England during this time and probably learned from this entire construct, wait a minute, this is going to be a good way to avoid it. The parlements in France are doing to our king what they're doing to the Stuarts back in England, right? So Parliament would stall deliberately and not vote on things and refuse to raise taxes for James and stuff like that, choke out his monetary resources. And this is after James wanted to redesign the Palace of Whitehall where he was living at the time, and he wanted to have a banqueting house put in there, and he was having parties down in the wine cellar and stuff like that with scantily clad women and also all of his favorite guy friends there and stuff like that. And it was a very, very weird time, right? And so James was being prevented from controlling his own money. So what does he do? He does something drastic, and he dissolved Parliament in 1622, which means he fired them. If you ever hear me say a dissolution of Parliament or a dissolving of Parliament, that's a big friggin' deal, all right? It's a really big deal, because here's the thing about it. Does James have the right to do this? Yes, he does. All right, so like literally in the government structure of England, it does say that to avoid a tyrannical parliament, the king is allowed to dissolve them should they feel that they are actually becoming too much in control and preventing the progression of the country. So that's the interesting thing. The parliament can limit the king, but the king can also limit the parliament. But it's also considered a slap in the face to the parliament at this end, in this juncture, because James is just trying to make money for himself. And he dissolves Parliament out of a little fit that he has, right? What a tool, okay? In 1622, he fires Parliament, right? And actually dissolves them, angering the people of England further, right? This is also, of course, going back to when he tried to like actually outlaw tobacco, and people literally just smoked more of it because they just didn't like James. They're calling him a queen. They're doing all these other different things. So we got some hectic stuff going on in England right now. The only true successes that James really had during his rulership has to do mostly with the fact that, one, he kept Britain out of the 30 Years' War. Because if we look at this date right here, 1622, when he was trying to raise money for himself and stuff like that, that's going to be after the start of the 30 Years' War. So he's going to actually keep Britain out of it, right? Like, he refused to get involved and stuff like that. He was like, this is a Holy Roman Empire problem, because this is still at the juncture in the first two phases of the 30 Years' War where it's a localized religious conflict, right? So he wanted to keep the British out of it. So he does. He actually does keep the British out of it very, very well. And he also settled the Jamestown colony of Virginia, because like I said in class, you know know James, you just don't realize you know James, right? James is the name that Jamestown Colony is named after, right? He also chartered a settlement for Puritan separatists in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620, right? So he is going to try and kind of make everybody happy in a weird little way, right? But the thing he hated the most is he felt that Parliament wasn't making him happy, right? But the thing about it is he's going to feud with Parliament constantly. He's going to do all this different stuff. But James is not nearly as bad as his son. All right, so like his son was even worse. And James got sick in 1625 and never recovered from his illness, and he died in 1625. And so rose to power his son Charles, right? The ultimate tool bag, right? Charles is way worse than James, right? James was kind of like annoying, right? Like he was annoying to the sense of like he was trying to make like people happy, like pass the English version of the Bible, which is a good thing, right? He's going to charter the Jamestown colony and the first two colonies of the Americas. That's a good thing, right? We appreciate all that stuff. But the problem with James was that he kind of treated his son really poorly, right? Creating, in this sense, kind of a jerky person, right? So Charles was a very, very sickly child, right? When James became king of England, Charles actually stayed back in Scotland because they were all thinking like, oh, this kid's going to die eventually. We might as well not even bring him into England. And actually, James showed favoritism to Charles' older brother, Henry. Charles' older brother, Henry, was the one that was supposed to become king, but he died at the age of 15 from a mysterious fever. Henry, everybody was excited about. Henry was strong, he was athletic, he was charming, he was intelligent and stuff like that. Charles, on the other hand, was heavily neglected, right? And was left behind in Scotland with his sister, right? And his sister would eventually be married off to somebody towards Prussia, and literally he is just left alone with his tutors, and his mom's not there, his dad's not there, and he became very spiteful of his father, right? He became very, very spiteful of his dad, and literally just kind of hung around and stuff like that. And when he ends up coming to England, because they now realize that Charles is going to become king of England one day, Charles sees what his dad's doing. He sees that his dad is having these huge parties at his house. He sees that his dad is trying to spend money for himself. He sees that his dad is kind of like avoiding war and stuff like that and wants to be a divine right ruler in his own case. Charles, on the other hand, instead of being like, I'm going to be good to my people, decides that he wants to evoke divine right rulership even more. He kind of thought his dad was like too soft on Parliament and too soft on other countries. Charles decides he wants to go to war. He wants to be a divine right absolutist, and he wants to be an authoritative, aggressive ruler, right? And this is funny because he's kind of a squeamish little dude, right? He only actually grew to be 5'4", 5'3", right? He was a very, very sickly kid, like I said. That affected his growth. He had a stutter as well. Charles I had a stutter and stuff like that, and he actually tried to train himself to speak without a stutter by putting rocks in his mouth, and that ended up shattering one of his teeth in his mouth and stuff like that. It's a very weird little thing because this little guy is going to get super, super angry all the time, right?